the double cave, known to millions and hundreds of millions as the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which is found in Hebron. The cynics out there will say, what's the big deal? Why didn't they just cremate the bodies? It's cleaner, cheaper, more ecological. I was once accused of being harsh and cruel and evil because I demanded that a friend of mine should be buried against the wishes of his non-Jewish wife, who wanted him cremated. Since I was the rabbi that was asked to do the funeral, I was the one who was insistent that he be buried. The reason for burial is because we Jews believe that within the body rests a soul, which is a spark of God, and that all peoples of the world, Jews and Gentiles, should be buried, not destroyed. The reason is because we believe in resurrection, not just for Jews, but for all good people. All good people will be resurrected. Those who don't get buried, due to their own decision, because they don't believe in this, won't be resurrected. Now, how do I know that there's a soul? I've experienced the soul, but you don't believe me. I've seen people who, if they're not clairvoyant, must have a magic crystal ball and a computer. I've seen ordinary people who are able to sense the souls of other people and tell them what is going on with them and give them advice. The only way for these things to be is if there is an intellect that is independent of the body, and we call this intellect the soul. In order for this intellect to remain after death, according to Maimonides, the intellect must pursue the knowledge of God, because only God is eternal. And the intellect that does not understand the eternity of God dies just as any other physical thing would die. But a soul is there. And the soul is the capacity to understand God. And that flies in the face of the evolution crowd, who believes that man is the product of a protozoa, a one-celled existence, probably a plant, coming from the muck, the old ancient soup that's about 4 billion years old. The problem, of course, with all of that is that it's impossible to replicate. We cannot replicate life. And the complexity of the DNA of any existence, of any creature, is so complex to defy description. There are cities and countries whose electronic system and communications are less complex than that of a single cell. It's just an incredible work of genius. And so how does this cell become alive? And how does the cell develop? And then how does the cell add on properties of motion, of the ability to procreate, to replicate itself, of the ability to find nourishment, the ability to sense, the ability ultimately to touch, to hear, and to see, and to feel. Where do these abilities come from? And I've argued over these videos that this cannot happen through evolution. Evolution, as the professor has it, cannot give a creature something that the creature cannot imagine to be. For there is no movement within the creature toward that thing. There could be a movement to adapt, a movement to hide, a movement to find food faster, a movement to flee in some way. But what movement could there be to feel, to hear, to see? It had to have been imposed from the outside. And I know that a lot of you believe in Dawkins's hypotheses of how there is a gradation from one step to the other, but this gradation itself doesn't make sense. There is no way that we begin to be sensitive to light, except that light burns. How do you develop a sensitivity to light other than being burnt by it? How do you develop a sensitivity to be drawn to light? You have to have senses. You have to have nerve endings. Where does that come from? All of those things in the development of creatures, even if they were to be developed from the small to the large, which I disagree with. I believe in microevolution. Things change within themselves. But one thing to another has never been observed. And all of the changes that they profess are just small changes of habit, small changes of eating, small changes of locomotion, small changes of limbs that develop a little bit different. But nothing that is markedly changes. No bee becomes a bird. And no bird goes back and forth from lizards. No bird has become a lizard. No lizard in recent memory has become a bird. The very fact that they may be related has more to do with the design process of existence than it does with evolution. One of the most telling things about Professor Dawkins is how third-rate of a philosopher he is. When he was asked, how did things start? How could there be a development that would cause evolution? His response was, he believed that aliens came along and set this up. And you have to ask yourself, how did the aliens get here? And how did they develop that mind? And of course he says, well, they developed the same way we did. But that's stupid, because someone would have had to have developed those aliens. Other aliens, how did they get developed? In other words, Professor Dawkins has no answer. And his answer is, by its own admission, a contradiction to his assertions. No, there was no gradual development of the eye. The eye, the development of the eye was designed, and if there was a progression, it was designed to progress. There is nothing in the protoplasm that can create an eye, nothing that can create an ear or sensitivity, nothing that would bring it to do that, nothing in its existence. What causes it is a supreme designer, which we religious people call God.